Hey y'all, howdy, welcome to One for the Books. I'm Sandy Broadwell, and today we're going to talk about 25 books that I plan to read in 2025. I, of course, have way more books than 25 that I want to read next year, but this has been a trending title lately, so I thought it would be fun to do one for myself. So this is kind of a combined 25 for 25 video and also my reading goals for the year. I have three major reading goals. The first one is that I want to read every book that I have bought or acquired in 2024 that I didn't get around to reading this year. I don't want to have a ton of books on my shelves that I haven't read. I want my shelves to be pretty curated of books that I have loved. So the best way to do that is to read the things that I buy, right? So as of right now in mid-ish December, I have 13 books that I have bought this year that I have not also already read this year. I have them in stacks of genre, so we'll go ahead and start with fantasy. The first one is Godkiller by Hannah Connor. It is the first book in a series about, I think, a character who kills gods or is a god slayer. I think that sounds neat. The cover is super beautiful, and I believe the third and final book of this series comes out in 2025, so it'll be a great time to pick up the first book. Then I have a book that I picked up from a used bookstore that does not have actually the cover jacket on it, but it is The Dragonbone Chair, which I will throw up the cover so you guys can see. This is considered a great fantasy classic that is very kind of typical farm boy, chosen one, saves the world, there's dragons. I don't know. I've just heard that this is one of the books that has inspired so many authors that we all know and love and are reading these days. And this is the first book in the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn trilogy by Tad Williams. So I definitely want to try out this fantasy classic, see how I'm feeling about classic fantasy these days, especially one that is so well beloved. Then on the dragon theme, I also have The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. This is the first book in the Burning series, and it is about a military academy, a revenge tale, and I believe it is also African inspired. So that all sounds super fun, and I believe there's also another book in this series coming out in 2025, so that's very exciting. And then my last fantasy book is The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan. This is the first book in the Empire of the Wolf series, and I just absolutely adore this cover artist. I can't think of her name right now, but basically every cover that she ever puts on a book, I'm like, I must read that book now. They're just so dark, but gritty and realistic and cool looking, and they just make me want to read these stories. Also, I've just heard really great things from other booktubers about The Justice of Kings. Moving into sci-fi. This might actually be sci-fantasy, but Gideon the Ninth is, as I've heard many times before, lesbian necromancers in space, and it is supposed to be pretty weird and fun, and I just think it sounds like a really good time. Then I have Ancillary Justice by Ann Leckie. This is also the first book in a series. I'm starting a lot of series, it sounds like, which is a little intimidating. I don't know the name of this series. The Imperial Radch? Huh. I don't know how to say this word. I'll have to Google it. Anyway, this is the start of a new series for me as well. There was a standalone book in this series called Translation State that was on the Goodreads Choice Awards last year, and I've just heard a lot about this author over the years. And then my final sci-fi book is 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. I read The Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne probably back when I was in high school, and I kind of expected it to be kind of a musty-dusty old book, but I was really pleasantly surprised by how fun and adventurous it was and kind of the deeper themes behind the story. So I'm really excited to give Jules Verne another chance with this classic. I also just picked it up because I absolutely love the cover. So that'll be a really cool one. Then I have three historical fictions that I've picked up so far this year. The Memoirs of Stockholm Sven by Nathaniel Ian Miller. This was recommended to me by David Arnold. David Arnold is also an author, and I interviewed him on my channel several years ago. He was actually the person who first introduced me to Ted Chiang as a book recommendation, author recommendation. Ted Chiang is now one of my favorite authors of all time. This was another book that he recommended to me in that same interview where I was talking to him a few years ago, and if I completely adored his recommendation last time, then I'm really excited to see if David and Arnold and I continue to have similar taste. But this is about a man that I think lives in the wilderness by himself. I think it's kind of a survival, but also maybe like found family sort of story. And the cover is just absolutely beautiful. So this should be a good wintertime read. Then I have Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. This was a really popular new release last year. And I believe it is about a woman in science back in the day when there weren't that many women in science, and she kind of gets pushed out of the field, but ends up starting a cooking show where she like empowers women and brings science to the kitchen and stuff like that. I've heard a lot of really good things about it, so it should be fun. My last historical fiction is We Ride Upon Sticks by Quan Barry. This is set in 1989 Massachusetts, and it is about a girls' field hockey team, and also I think maybe about witchcraft. So I'm not sure if this is actually like magical realism or fantasy, or if it's just historical realism with some witchy vibes, but I think it's like set around the Salem, Massachusetts area. So this one could be really cool, hopefully. Then I have two kind of contemporary ones that I've picked up. On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong is supposed to be about grief. Ocean Vuong is a poet traditionally, and I think this might be their first like fictional book that they've released, but it has amazing reviews and people just talk about how gorgeously it's written and how moving it is as a story, so interested to give it a try. And the last contemporary one I have is Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt, which is supposed to be about a octopus in an aquarium and a woman who works at the aquarium that the octopus kind of befriends, and the octopus is like a perspective character that you get to read from, which sounds very fun. And this one also I think is a pretty recent release that has gotten really great reviews. The final book that I have picked up this year but not yet read is another one from a used bookstore, and that is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, which I got for $1. Last year around this time, I read A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, and I was absolutely transported when I read it. It was so beautiful and lyrical, and I have watched various adaptations of A Christmas Carol like my entire life and always loved the story of it, but I didn't realize how moving I would find the original itself, and just how much I was really in love with Charles Dickens' writing, and I've never read anything else by him. So Great Expectations, obviously one of his classics, and I'm excited to read more of Charles Dickens and see if I continue to love his writing as much as I did in A Christmas Carol. So those are the 13 books that I have hauled or acquired this year somehow that I have not yet gotten around to reading. I expect that number will go up because I have asked for quite a few books for Christmas from all of my family members. So there's a chance that more of those books will get added to this pile that I will read in 2025, but we'll see how it goes. My second reading goal for 2025 is to read at least 8 classics. I put out a video earlier this year, right around my birthday, where I talked about 40 classics that I want to read before I turn 40. It was my 34th birthday, which means I had 6 years. And basically I needed to be reading about 6 classics every year if I wanted to read at least 40 classics before I turned 40 from the time I published that video. Unfortunately, I only read 4 classics in 2024, so I'm 2 behind. So that means I need to read 8 classics next year if I want to stay on track. I already obviously talked about 2 of these, Great Expectations and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So the other 6, one of them I already have on my shelf because I found it at a Little Free Library, and that is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This is supposed to be a kind of gothic horror about a woman who moves in with her new husband, and all of their like servants are like, everything's just a little bit sinister, and it's kind of like a vibes book. So this should be a good like around Halloween or fall time, I think, dark kind of read. Other classics that I think I definitely want to read in 2025, The Count of Monte Cristo is a movie that I really enjoyed back when I was in high school when that came out, and so I've always wanted to give the book a go, but it is a big chunk of a book, and I've been a little intimidated, but I think 2025 is the year. I would also love to read Alice in Wonderland, which of course is a Disney cartoon classic that I grew up with, and I would love to read the original Lewis Carroll story. Another adaptation that I've seen that I would like to give the original a try on is I, Robot by Isaac Asimov, which is a sci-fi classic that still I think is pretty genre defying to this day. Defining, not defying. The last two classics that I think I want to give a go in 2025 are The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, which is like kind of a classic, one of the original like haunted house stories that still is creeping people out, and Master and Margarita, which is a Russian classic that has something to do with the devil, and there's always a cat on the cover, which I find very intriguing. So I don't really know what that one's about, but it's got to be a classic for a reason, right? So we'll find out together. So those are the 13 hauled and 8 classics that I would like to read. So that leaves 4 more left. My final reading goal for 2025 is I would like to read at least 10 new releases. That was my goal for this year as well, and I think I've read almost 20. I think I've read like 17 or 18 new releases this year. So 10 I think should be no big deal. And I talked about all of my most anticipated releases for 2025 in my most recent video from last weekend, so I will be sure to link that down below. But 4 of them that I think I am the most excited about. Number 1 would be The Devils by Joe Abercrombie. Mostly I'm so excited about this one because I just finished The Wisdom of Crowds by Joe Abercrombie, which is the 9th and final book of the First Law World series. That series just absolutely blew me away multiple times. I am so impressed with Joe Abercrombie's writing, his ability to kind of get at the heart of deep social issues, and his really just kind of sharp and witty writing, his humor, which is very sarcastic, and also just the depth of feeling that I have for the characters, even though it's grimdark and most of the characters are unlikable. I'm just excited to see what Joe Abercrombie does outside of the First Law world, so The Devils is high up on the list. Then Catabasis by R.F. Kuang is a new release coming out next year that honestly, the premise is something about like 2 academic rivals have to go to hell to save their advisor. Sounds really kind of silly and stupid to me, but I have loved all of the other 5 books that R.F. Kuang has published to date. So I'm just trusting her on this, and I'm so excited to pick up whatever R.F. Kuang puts out next, and I hope that I will love it. Then Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix, which I have only read one other Grady Hendrix book so far, The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, which I just read this past October, and it was a really fun read. So I love witchy books, I love historical fiction, I love creepy, like gothic vibes. So I think that this book has a lot of things going for it that I will hopefully really, really love. And then finally, The Last Contract of Asako is probably the next new release that I am most excited for. And this is by Fonda Lee, the author of the Greenbone Saga. This is her first kind of debut sci-fi novel. It has to do with late stage capitalism, samurais, space, anti-colonialism. It just has a lot of really fun, rompy sounding buzzwords that I think is gonna make a really hilarious sci-fi book. So those are the 25 books.
Those are the 25 books.
Did you notice how I can't count? Yeah, I did too. So turns out I double counted Great Expectations and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea as both owned books that I have to read and classic books that I want to read. So I owe you 2 more books in order to have 25 and 25, right? My other 2 probably most excited new releases I have for next year are The Ashfire King by Chelsea Abdullah, which is book 2 of the Sand Sea trilogy, the book following The Stardust Thief. It's a book that has a lot of Middle Eastern inspired magic and djinn and cool artifacts. The main character is named the Midnight Merchant, and she's like a black market artifact stealer. It just had a really cool adventure vibe, and there was a lot of kind of secrets and angst and mystery that were part of the first book that made me really excited about where the second book is gonna go. Finally, my 25th book of 2025 that I'm very excited to read is the third and final book of the Library Trilogy by Mark Lawrence, which is called The Book That Held Her Heart. The Library Trilogy so far has been really cool, amazing world building, and it's about an infinite library. I mean, what more could you ask for in terms of like cozy epic fantasy? So the first book had a lot of cool plot twists. Second book introduced some new like fantastical species that were not a part of the first book. Hopefully that book 3 of this series is going to be pretty epic. So okay, that's actually 25. Those are the 25 books that I absolutely must read in 2025. Let me know down in the comments below what books you absolutely must read in 2025, or maybe what some of your reading goals are for next year. I'd love to hear about it. Thanks so much for tuning in and hanging out. Please be kind, read books, and hit the subscribe button down below for more bookish content to come. I'll see you next time.